you have our report. I just wanted to share and point out a couple of highlights for you. I assure you, in the field, we had smooth technology, so there were no problems with that. Listed up here on this first slide, if you can see, are the collaborators. We have some excellent resources through the library, the Digital Heritage and Humanities group, and so to be able to do LiDAR and a lot of the remote sensing that we were able to do is through that resource. So that's something we're very lucky, and everyone here contributed and made this possible. So we have two objectives in this project. The first was to investigate possible subsurface anomalies that were reported by New South Associates at 27 possible grades. In 2019, we did extensive field work locating each of those anomalies and excavating them, and then reported back. None of those anomalies were burials. It was very culturally sterile area. They turned out to be tree roots or stumps in almost every case. The second objective, and what we've worked on over this past year, was using LiDAR and other remote sensing to look at other areas of the property, and then geo-reference that with data that we had collected in our prior field missions, going back really to 2012, and we wanted to compile all that into one area so that there would be a record and you could see what's been done and what areas in which methods we used. So this first figure shows some of the prior 2012-2013 search areas where we do extensive pedestrian surveys, and then as well as cadaver dogs, and then in 2019 the areas as well. So pretty extensive coverage over what was the former grounds, including very thick wooded areas, because that's where you're basically searching, walking that area, and so you're able to get into those areas. We also plotted for you all of the prior contemporary and prior GPR work and areas that we did excavation, trenches, and mechanical excavation. So most of those areas were ground truth pretty extensively and beyond where the boundary of the GPR may have been. This past year we did drone survey using LiDAR, also covered as much of the campus as we could, and what I'll point out to you is that this is a great technology when we have open surface area, when we have tree cover, buildings, thick brush, anything that obscures the ground surface, then it becomes not a useful tool for what we're looking for. So when you think about looking for burials, there's two scenarios that could explain the burial. It could be an individual clandestine grave on its own. There were reports of that. And then there could be an actual burial ground or cemetery unmarked, which, as you know, we also found. And so we have to approach this with both of those sort of potentials in mind, because even though we're using a lot of the same tools and technology, the search strategy and how we interpret the data varies a little bit if it's a single grave versus a row of graves. Just another example showing you what the resolution looks like in some of the imagery. I wanted to just point this out to you. This is the area where we excavated last summer looking for the 27 anomalies. And what you see as just fuzz snow in figure A is data that was available from 2007 when there was aerial LiDAR taken. So by flying over the site, we were able to obtain this prior data. But you can see that when you have drone data, it's much higher quality resolution than aerial. And you also get a sense of what the tree cover does to the ground surface and why so much of this property we're really not able to use any of these methods because of, well, first there was planted trees, and then Hurricane Michael led to extensive destruction, which made a lot of this area where we couldn't even walk it anymore, where we used to be able to go through, it was now, the trees were down and it was almost impossible to get through. I also wanted to show you this example just to give you an idea of quality of resolution and what it looks like when you're trying to interpret data. So this is actually the area of Boot Hill after the reburial of the 7 graves from the fire victims in 2019. And you see the square outline with the fences. This is the 2 benches. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but I'm pointing in the middle of the benches. And then what you see a little bit of a line here, this is a row of 7 burials, basically created a year ago, and then the mulberry tree. So all around it, all this tree cover, obviously you can't see the ground surface. That's just a close-up image to show you a little closer view of what I'm talking about. The best, in my opinion, the best methods and way in which we're able to ultimately not just find burials, but before we even get to that step, basically look for areas where we should excavate, where they may be. And this is what we do in all historic cemetery projects, as well as cases for law enforcement when we're looking for individual clandestine burials. Is it's really important to get all of the historic photos, aerial images, roads, anything that will help us understand how that land was used and points of access. And that's what we did here for the whole property, and then geo-referenced everything through time so that it lines up. So what you're looking at on the top is a historic photograph of the Boot Hill area and surrounding area, where we've overlaid roads, prior paths, trails, field roads. 2014, we found a lot of the old fence lines as well, by the post holes that remained underground. These are your points of access. This is going to show you where people would have traveled and where burials would be located. We've combined that now with the LiDAR data just to give you a sense for that, and that's how we then identify this is an area we should look at further. Maybe then we do GPR or excavation or areas that we sort of can rule out as low probability. And that's the strategy, and that's what we did throughout. And just the final image, basically showing you that same thing where it's really important that everything gets overlaid, all the historic imagery, as well as current data, and then we start to highlight and show areas where there may have been clearings and points of access throughout time that would make it possible. I would just say that with regard to the location of those 27 anomalies that came up where we were looking for those last year, we immediately did the same strategy before going up to the field, and it was evident that that space was next to where there had been a prior gas pump that they used on the farm, as well as an intersection, which was the main sort of intersection in the farm. So it seemed like an unlikely area based on how that land was used historically and how it fell together. And when we excavated, it was culturally sterile. We really didn't find, any evidence of anything other than the pasture that it had been. So this is a little bit about the strategy and what we do. It also shows the limitations. I know that LiDAR is an excellent tool. We've used it successfully in historic cemetery projects, but it really depends on the landscape. And we have some of those limits here because of the forestation. So I would just really like to hear if you have questions or if there's anything more specific that I can go into. I'm happy to do that.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kimberly. And obviously, owing to the technical difficulties we had, we're going to have to change our process a little bit for public question and public comment. However, we will start with the folks that are in the room, and I do have a list of a few folks that have indicated that they would or may like to speak. And then after that, we will check with the folks that may have dialed in on the conference line that I announced a few minutes ago.
And Dr. Parsons,
Yes, ma'am.
I want to add, we're going to include one additional step. Because we experienced technical challenges this morning, we are going to put a link up on the Division of Historical Resources website with a link to the media video so that anybody who had challenges after the original broadcast wasn't working can watch it on video and give a 7-day period for those folks to also submit any comments or thoughts or ideas they have via email. Just in case there was anyone who was with us on the original link that hasn't been able to join back in via phone, we'll provide them a forum to participate here today too. So with that, Dr. Parsons, you can get back to our public comment.
Thank you, Secretary. On the list for folks in the auditorium, we have Mr. Charles Fudge.
Thank you, Secretary Lee and the board for allowing me to speak. I have some questions for Dr. Kimberly and you as well, Secretary Lee, regarding your recent LiDAR work and so forth. Do you remember when I was there with Ben Montgomery and yourself?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, you remember the buildings that were up on the hill that I had said as a 12-year-old boy that there was a graveyard on the east side of those buildings that could have possibly gone between Dozier property and Air Base Road?
Correct.
Were those ever taken and had LiDAR completed there?
Yes, if I can back up here to that side of the campus, let me just show you. So this is the south side of the campus, and these are the dormitories.
Exactly, I was in the very last floor right there. And from
And
that point to Dozier Road
right, which is
and
here.
up to the front of that, there was a cemetery there. It has grown so thick and big, you can no longer see it. When I was there, the grounds were maintained, and I could sit on my cottage bench and see that cemetery. Now, what happened to that cemetery, I don't know. But if there's not a cemetery there, I need to see a psychiatrist, because my mind at 12 years old remembers that cemetery. And I don't feel that the work was adequately done to find it.
Well, I can tell you what we did specifically in this area. So in any of these areas where where there is still like open grassland, right? Like in up even around Pierce Cottage, around in here, not inside this fence of the new jail, but the this area back here across this little creek, up to the woods, all the way around to the bachelor cottages. In all of these open areas, we've done GPR. We did fly with the drone. We've done mechanical excavation over all of this southern part, as well as test pits through here, wherever there was any indication of something. As you can, and we didn't find anything. Now, all of this, you're right, all of this woods was cleared. This was actually where the mine was for the clay when they made the bricks, when they had the brick manufacturing. And then this was pastures, or I'm sorry, not pastures, but fields. Just like this is still a field. I think, I'm trying to remember what they grow there. I'm sorry, offhand I'm forgetting. But even when we flew and went up, most of the time, like this is looking very mowed right here. It wasn't, we didn't get very good data because there was always like crops, I don't know, alfalfa, whatever it was. There was something in here. There is a cemetery, it's a little bit cut off in this picture. Right here, there is a cemetery, a historic cemetery that's been there for a long time. With this open as fields as it was, that, that may have been visible. I'm not saying that's what you saw, I don't know, but we even looked around in that historic cemetery wondering if people were ever just buried there as well. So I think that, I feel like we've done everything we can in terms of where it's open and where we can look, but as you know, even at, on Boot Hill, I mean, there were, some of the burials were under trees, and if that's the case, then, until that area is, completely redeveloped, there's, I don't think anything else they can do to search it.
Well, is it my understanding that you just stated that there was a cemetery in there?
There is a cemetery. It's approximately right here. It's cut off on this image, and that's a historic cemetery. There's a fence around it. The last time I was up there, it was locked, but there are all sorts of different markers, and it's pretty extensive. So as I said, I was particularly interested if, particularly in the early years, if they ever used that for any, children or staff that may have died. But I didn't find a link.
So you're saying that your LiDAR would have picked up graves that would have been children's size in that historic cemetery?
No, we didn't do LiDAR over the historic cemetery because we know there are graves there. What I looked for was historic records or witness statements, anything that would link someone to that site.
Well, I'm sure you've heard the expression that seeing is believing, correct? And Secretary Lee and Patrick Gillespie at the meeting for the anomalies had told some of us White House boys that we could be present when you did your work in your LiDAR to point out specific areas. We were not allowed to do that. I was also in the understanding that this would probably take place in the coolness of 2019. And on your reports here, it shows that it was done in July, which was shortly after the meeting that we had in June regarding the anomalies.
Well, I can tell you that we did the LiDAR over the entire property and any place where there was, where the ground surface is evident. So in the thickest parts of the woods down here in fields where you can't see the surface, we didn't fly it that far because there's no reason to.
Well,
you have to be able to see the ground surface. So I'm just saying in that regard, it's not necessary to show, and in terms of collecting the data and flying the drone, we covered as much as was visible.
Not to talk over you, but can you explain why we were not able to be present when this work was done by you in the state?
Well, first, I don't think I knew that you wanted to come. I mean, we tend to not have it open to the, to the public or bring people on site when we're doing it. We didn't allow media either. You can't actually, everybody except for the individual flying the drone has to leave. Otherwise, you end up with, little figures in the imagery. So, that could be part of it too. The way in which the process works, and then the timing.
Okay, well, I will refer that question to Secretary Lee and Patrick Gillespie. Is there a purpose why we wasn't able to be there?
Sure. Now, my understanding from hearing from our archaeologists and the team of professionals who were sent out to the site, of course, as we heard Dr. Kimberly explain, her team has used GPR, drones, hand excavation, LiDAR, and visual inspection as part of their report. So I know they were very thorough in their methodology. With respect to inclusion of you and other stakeholders, my understanding is that the USF team did not open their actual work to either the public or the media. With respect to a secondary site visit, if we were to go with Mr. Gillespie, you, me, others, I've been advised, and perhaps Dr. Parsons or Dr. Kimberly can speak to this, that while that was something that was of interest for us, that the particular areas are no longer safe due to damage from Hurricane Michael, overgrowth of brush, and other things. So I was discouraged from making that kind of personal inspection on the site, but I will defer to our experts to provide any further comment about public traversing some of these areas and whether there are any safety concerns associated with that or not. I know they can say it better than I can. And as always, if there are specific things, actions, steps that you believe that Dr. Kimberly and her team or the Department of State should be taking, we would welcome your input about what those are. First steps, let's go to Dr. Parsons about public visiting of the site and any limitations that exist currently from people doing that safely.
Sure. Thank you, Secretary Lee. First, I'd like to emphasize what Dr. Kimberly said, which was that, one, in an effort to ensure, complete independence on the part of the researchers, and also to prevent any issues related to the technology, it is true that members of the public weren't on site, nor were members of the media, while the actual LiDAR scanning was taking place with the drones. With respect to the actual site around that time, I had visited when Dr. Kimberly and her team were doing the initial dig over on the other side of the campus, and had the opportunity to see and visit the other side. And in my opinion, at that time, it was not safe for a large or even small group of people to really be traversing for reasons that had to do with lots of downed trees. The buildings were unsafe. This was not that long after Hurricane Michael, and it was not a very safe or comfortable environment when I was there, and so Secretary Lee is correct. I had concerns about public visitation, and I know in my communications with the county as well, they had concerns about public on the land at the time because of the number of trees that were down and the condition of the property. Prior to the work that they have since done, and I have not been there in several months, but my understanding now is that they've cleared out a lot of the trees that fell during Hurricane Michael, and that they've essentially shored up a lot of the property to make it safer for visits.
Over the last 2 years, a number of us White House boys have been up there numerous times, and even though there was debris and all, we were still able to work around it. One last question, and I'll leave it to someone else. Dr. Kimberly, is there a more sufficient LiDAR that would show things through trees and areas that your LiDAR may have not taken?
No.
There is nothing better than what y'all had to
That's
take
correct.
and focus that whole property. And is it my understanding that the property from Air Base Road to Posier Road, and from Posier Road to the west, all the way to the highway that divided the two campuses, has been totally LiDAR'd?
Well, I would refer you, generally yes, but I would refer you to the figures in the report that show the exact areas, in grids and coordinates, because as I said, there are areas where it's thick wood that we did not, around the edges, as you can see. I don't know if my screen is still up on your screen, but that's
So in my question, it's not been completely taken care of as far as the roads that I mentioned. Thank you all very much.
Just bear up there a minute, Charlie.
yeah.
I have
Ma'am, could you please introduce yourself?
Rachel McCoy.
Thank you.
I, along with Charlie and the rest of the White House boys, have been at many of these meetings, and y'all want us to move past and move forward. That's all I've heard. So how hard is it to let these men walk the property with cadaver dogs? Parsons told us we could do that with special cadaver dogs. How hard would it be to let these men that have been there, none of us have been there, they have been there. There's nothing wrong with letting these men walk the property with dogs and with Dr. Kimberly, whoever needs to be there. I mean, please let them do that. Give them that. Y'all keep asking what we need. This is what they need. I mean, how hard, I'm sorry if we find more or we don't. I mean, there's still 150.
180 people that's not accounted for, along with all the records. I didn't
So how
bring that up,
wonderful
but that's a
could it be if
question.
we
Where's
could
the
bear these
records for
boys
all
with the other
years?
40? So that's where I'm at with this, and I appreciate all the work that Dr. Kimberly has done, but that whole property all the way over fences, because, I mean, you're going back 111 years. I mean, there are other things that can be done, and to set everybody's mind at ease. And we could lay it to rest, and we've been told in many meetings of things that could be done. I mean, it's not that hard to let them, they're not just the public, they were there. So that is a big difference. So that is an insult to our intelligence, honestly. These men are there, let them walk the property with dogs, special cadaver dogs, not just any cadaver dogs. I can't remember, honestly, what the word was that you used for these dogs, but I remember speaking to you about that. So, and I understand the coronavirus hit, but now we can move forward and maybe let this happen for these men. Thank you.
Thank you. I can address the question about the cadaver dogs. We did, absolutely. And it may still be possible to undertake that research. At the time, we had hoped that we would be able to do that prior to basically conducting the hurricane cleanup. Again, at the time, we were advised that it wasn't a good idea to be out there doing that kind of work at the time. Since then, unfortunately, the individual who owns those dogs has been unable to do that work. And you're correct; these particular cadaver dogs were specially trained to identify remains that are older than typical forensic cases. So they're, as I understand it, one of a kind. And for reasons that are hers, and I don't know exactly what those are, she has been unable to do that. And we were advised that she wasn't going to be able to conduct that work at the present time. That may still be something that's possible in the future. With regard to individuals being there on site, I've mentioned this before, and I will say I may have said at one time that people could be out there with the dogs.
It would be a small group. I mean, we could figure out a way for these men, just like when they opened the doors, before the doors were open,
Yes,
to the
ma'am.
public, for them to walk around.
What I've learned since then is really twofold. One, before she was unable to do the work at the present for the last few months, if there are other individuals there, the dogs won't target properly. So it really needs to be her and her dogs. To overcome that, we had contemplated bringing in a group of the White House boys, Mr. Fudge and others beforehand to show me and whoever else might be there where they would like the dogs to check. And again, that might be something that's possible in the future with these dogs, but it's really up to the owner of those animals. And I'm happy to check in with her again and see when they'll be available, but they just haven't been for the last few months.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, they'd be happy to stand over the bridge while, they just need to be there to see that this has been done. They've been lied to over and over for many years and kept this inside themselves for many years. I mean, it's time to let them, heal and know that the work is being done properly. And, I mean, things were different then to now. And, I mean, there's nothing wrong with letting them
Could
do
you
this.
please step? I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you please step
All
up
right.
to the mic? I was just told that you were hard to hear because you weren't close.
So I just feel that they should be able to be there, even if it's, a special area where they can see that the work that they've asked to be done is done in the areas that they have truly pointed to. And I mean, it doesn't take rocket science to know that, if you're doing something shady, you're not going to do it in the middle of the property. You're going to go to the outskirts. So, I mean, that's just my thought on it, and would like something to be done more for these men to help bring closure to them.
Thank you, and I can tell you, insofar as the specially trained dogs are concerned, that I'll continue to look into that. And if they become available, then I committed that I would try and make that happen, and I can stand behind that as long as it remains
Wonderful.
possible.
I mean, that sounded really good to me. and many others. Thank you.
I have one more question answered since we've got a lot of legal minds up there.
Yes, sir, if you could come up to the mic, please.
Charles Fudge again. I would like to ask people that's got legal minds, because I certainly don't, but I feel that my civil rights were violated when they took me there for being incorrigible. And not only that right, but the right of my freedom to speak. We were told that if we ever wrote a letter or told our parents anything that took place in the White House, that we would get another beating. And if that's not some kind of screwing up our civil rights, I don't know what is. Can you give an opinion on that?
So, Mr. Fudge, I'll start with that. If someone else on the panel has thoughts, of course, they are welcome to share. But we are not, although I think a couple of us up here may actually be lawyers. What you've just described is a very specific, very individual, very important legal question, but it is not something that I believe any of us would be prepared to answer. I would encourage you, to the extent that you have questions about whether there is any sort of legal right or cause of action associated with your experiences, to seek counsel to explore that further. But I know I can speak for myself and say that I'm not in a position to give that kind of advice to you today. Are there other? But as I mentioned earlier, with respect to the inspection of the property and the work that's been done on the property, if there are other items, Ms. McCoy just describes, if there are other things that you think are important that you would like to see done, you can certainly let us know what those are. And Dr. Kimberly and Dr. Parsons and the team will certainly review those and consider any of your thoughts and ideas and suggestions.
Well, I would certainly appreciate that the state of Florida make sure that the White House does not accidentally get bulldozed over while they're doing the demolitions on that property. That is very meaningful to us boys that was taken there and beaten. And for them to have an accidental bulldozer run away would probably be very devastating to lots of us. Secretary Lee, staff, and Dr. Kimberly, I in no way meant no disrespect to any of y'all. I'm just an old guy that was there 60 years ago and went through hell. And I think when you get my age, you can look back at life and realize how that place changed most of us from being good citizens into being angry citizens. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Fudge.
Tell me your name, Don.
John Bill,
Yes, sir, go right ahead.
Florida School for Boys Industrial School has always been a mystery ever since it started. It's been run by corrupt officials of the state of Florida who knows what has been going on in that school. We, the White House boys, we know what has happened in that school. We're trying to present our facts to the state of Florida to get this thing accomplished and over with. It has been going on for way too long. And as a White House boy, I'm going to say it's going to continue to go on because it's not going to be over until we say it's over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Diane Fudge, would you still like to speak?
Hi, everybody. Diane Fudge. Associated with this guy here, love him dearly, and all the other guys. Anyway, I have been the unofficial, official webmaster for the official White House Boys website for many years. And so I'm kind of speaking in that capacity. If people call and say, oh, did you know about this or cover that, that's the way I get information, is through people asking about the website giving information that they think should be on the website. And I guess it goes back probably about 10 years. And in that time, there have been 5 people, one being Charlie and his brother who's passed, that have been just so certain of these cemeteries. And I know that before the original FDLE investigation, FDLE had said, and I'm going back to maybe 2009, and FDLE had said, no, there's 31 graves, we know there's so many people in a peacock, and we know who everybody is, and obviously the 31 ended up to be 52. So it's not a stretch of the imagination regarding Boot Hill. So it's not a stretch of the imagination that there are people, some have passed, some are still living, that are saying, there was also a cemetery on the other side of the road. I hate to say black side, white side, but that's how they referred to it during segregation. And I mix up my north, south, east, west, so you don't want me to go there. But the opposite side of the highway from where the cemeteries that were found. And if Miss Kimberly could look at page 10 in your report, Dr. Kimberly. It's the easiest way for me to see it, but these 3 cottages, behind that there are 3 houses that are maybe not on Dozier property, and then over to the right is where the building now known as Pierce Hall is. And anybody that has told me that they've seen a cemetery has been out back in here. Now, also there have been a couple of people that count behind the White House and over closer to Posier Road. And it kind of clicked a light bulb in me one day last week that if you were to kill somebody, you wouldn't bury it on your front lawn, you'd go kind of to the woods behind. And I'm just not sure that either the LiDAR is possible or whether ground penetrating radar is possible or dogs or whatever. But everybody points to this area kind of behind the last cottages, behind the White House, going out towards Air Base Road and Posier Road. And I really got this, I think we were there about a week or so ago, and taking a last look before they do demolition. And I thought about it, and the light bulb moment was, this makes a whole lot of sense, because you wouldn't bury in your backyard, you'd go out to the woods. And I don't know if there were woods at that time, but I'm afraid some of that may not be actual Dozier property, is what I'm saying. But I really feel, for the sake of the boys, that the search should be able to extend to Posier Road and then Air Base Road, because that's most likely and may not be on state property. The other thing that I wanted to say is that the men that have identified to me in the capacity of webmaster, not Charlie's wife, in this area, say behind Pierce or behind these 3 last cottages, and then there's that little road with 3 more homes on it, out in this kind of an area, 3 different men that had never met each other and had no connection. They weren't at school at the same time. They didn't know one another. And a reporter was asking about cemeteries, graves, so on. And he actually put together, and I could probably find the article and date, I would say maybe 2013-ish. But he said, wait a minute, I've talked to Charles Fudge, and I can't recall the other 2 guys' names, and they're all putting a cemetery in the same place, but they don't know each other, and they've never communicated with you. They've never even seen each other at a reunion. 3 totally separate accounts. So I just want to leave it open that, once before FDLE said there weren't graves, and then there were another 20 when Dr. Kimberly did thorough work, and it would just be too much of a coincidence to have 5 or 6 men, again, 2 of them have passed away, saying that there are other areas, and that just not be true. So I want you to always keep in mind that it's, although Dr. Kimberly makes great conclusions, and here's a whole bunch of work that she's done, but it's not a conclusion to the people that saw it with their own eyes. 2 more quick points. I'm sorry for taking so long. But Charlie mentioned, and he didn't say today, but the crosses that were on the cemeteries that he could see from his back porch or when he delivered mail to the cottage out behind, he told me those were the same steel crosses that were over at Boot Hill. So if that was a private cemetery, it's a far stretch of the imagination to think that they would have the same metal pipe crosses that were over at Boot Hill. And then, got hung up on the crosses now. I had one last point. But, when Thomas Varnado, who was the gentleman on behalf of his uncle that stopped I think it was an injunction, that's the right word, but to stop the sale of the property until they found his uncle. And when you read those reports, when his aunt was taken, she didn't like the fact that her son was being buried at Dozier, and she wanted to take him home. And that guard showed her 3 separate cemeteries and said he could be here, he could be here, he could be here. So in my heart, and I know in the heart of the men that have seen it, Charlie had a lot of access because he was the mail delivery person. You couldn't just go wandering around the property, but he went to all the places to deliver mail. Just please never consider it done until every last stone has been unturned, and that's all we can ask, is that you please continue to put some time and resources and brains together if we have to knock down a few trees or something. But it's when so many things, too many coincidences, it's usually not a coincidence. So thank you for your time.
And just to set the record straight, I was Tidwell's office boy. I did not deliver the mail. They had
Deliver notices. Okay.
Thank you. Dr. Kimberly, I think you said that you wanted to respond.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Diane. Hope you're doing well. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things for you to help. One thing is I really understand your frustration. I mean, this is what we do all the time. Obviously we've been working at Dozier for a long time, but we also work on many missing person cases, searching, farms for burials and so on. And I feel your frustration is like, we're here to find them, so that's what we want to do. The idea that there could possibly be more is always there. There could always, possibly be another burial or another, clandestine grave. We're talking 1,400 acres of planted forest. There's no way to look underneath in all of that space. We looked at the surface, just to clarify, when you talk about the different roads surrounding that southern portion of the grounds all the way to both highways, we did search that extensively by walking it, looking at the ground surface, looking for any evidence. When we think back to like when we first started at Boot Hill, the crosses that had been put there in the 60s were replaced by the metal crosses in the 80s. And broken pieces of those crosses were found. We found them throughout the woods. We also found them buried slightly below the surface. So we look for things like that as we walk through the woods, as we look for depressions, look for planted rows of cypress trees, right? Old fence lines. These are the things that we're doing when we're walking all of that acreage, is trying to look for any of those sort of clues or things, and then excavate. And we did. We excavated by hand, which I can tell you is a very challenging thing, where you used to where they pulled clay for bricks to try and dig that. It's like not a very easy thing, but we in some of those southern parts of the woods and things like that. So I just want to let you know that those areas, I feel like we have searched as much as, you can, given how thick of the woods it is and the challenges of how that land has been used. The reports by families, such as Glen Barnajo, when they were told and shown multiple burial areas by guards, all of those burial areas were still on the north side near Boot Hill, just for clarification, in terms of the actual staff who worked there and said, hey, there's people buried here and over here. In those cases, it was still within proximity to one another. A lot of questions initially about the possibility of two cemeteries had to do with segregation. We know that this Boot Hill was not segregated at all. It wasn't even segregated by row and so forth. And we still have more bodies, more children buried there than we have names for on our list. So I'm just telling you this because we take a very, conservative, scientific approach, following every lead, but always looking for evidence. The idea that anything's possible is always there, but we just try to work through it one step at a time, on parsimony, which is usually, start with what's simple and what we know and go from there. So that's pretty much just, what I wanted to let you know is that I hear you, what you're saying, your frustration. But I think to some extent, the trees and the forestation is what's making it impossible. But having said that, I also don't think, that we're looking for an entire whole other cemetery. And as you said, if you're trying to hide a murder that you did, that's a clandestine grave. That's somebody burying somebody individually. That's different than an entire cemetery. So that's why we take that dual approach and try and, look at both possibilities. So anyway, I hope that helps clarify a little bit.
Dr. Kimberly, can you just clarify, all the way out to Air Base Road and all the way to Posher Road, is there not some private land in between the Dozier property and those two roads?
If today some of it is private, that may be. I don't know how land ownership looks today, but we did all of our work based on the historic property, the 1,400 acres. So we did search it. So sorry, whether it was state land or not, those fields, that woods up into that historic cemetery, we did walk and search all of that because historically it was Dozier property.
So you searched all the way to the border of Posher and all the way to the border of Air Base? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And we have one more person who's registered to speak, and it's Gary Rice.
I think Gary Rice should be on the phone or...
Okay.
He lives in South Carolina.
All right, Mr. Rice, if you're on the phone, if you could, please hit, make sure I get the number correct. Oh, Gary, thank you. Yes, we can hear you. If you can go ahead and ask your question or offer your comment.
Yes. Yeah, I'd like to just read a statement if you don't mind.
Of course.
Appreciate you letting me speak. This takes less than 3 minutes, maybe a little over. It's really not good news for you, but I'm going to go ahead and get it out there and get it done. According to a letter from the Honorable Governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, that he sent to Chairman Clint Page, Jackson County Board of County Commissioners, it came to the governor's attention that there was a discovery of what appeared to be graves on the Dozier School for Boys campus in Marietta. The discovery was around March 2017 or earlier. Once the governor was informed of the grave anomalies, he wrote in April that he personally wanted to coordinate his office, GeoSyntech, along with the Department of Management Services and the Department of Environmental Protection Agency services for the state. That letter goes on to point out the original contract with DEP was created and executed in 2017. I have a copy of the letter. For the record, this is the time when, or approximately the time when the David Melvin Engineering Company got involved. I present this as evidence that the state of Florida, along with the county of Jackson, with possibly help from the city of Marietta, who at the time enjoyed a $5.8 million donation to clean up the juvenile death camp called Dozier. As partial evidence of a cover-up, I point out that the first round of investigative digging by Dr. Kimberly, which I appreciate, by the way, Doctor, was done with small tools of the trade, brushes, and also the work was done in a painstaking way with many students. The pace was a snail's pace. They were there to find the truth. I personally saw the pictures of the graves that you call anomalies. I dug graves for a living. At the graveyard my grandparents are buried in. I know what a grave looks like. Those pictures were scrubbed from the web, but my pick crawler got a copy. In closing, the bulldozers used to, quote, investigate, close quote, the 27 graves was to prevent anyone from ever discovering the truth. Just so you know, for the record, this is exactly what I expected from you. Remember, I had dealings with Florida before. I've also got a copy of the empty apologies given to me by the state of Florida because at the time we were promised more. This is just the beginning, and I'm quoting. You are sadly tasked with protecting Florida's financial interests and to be sure they never have to pay for their crimes. You here today simply represent those that murdered, tortured, raped, and molested the children of the state of Florida. They gave me an apology for it. You have no serious interest in any of the White House boys. You don't even consider covering the costs for their rooms and travel. Many White House boys are in prison and many are on welfare. You are like the men on the boat in the movie Jaws, desperate to survive, picking at the sharks that were eating them from the legs up. Like those men, you will be eaten by those sharks. We are not the sharks. The sharks are your very own families, who when they see how you treated the crimes against children done by the state of Florida, they will become those sharks. I know this is a harsh truth, and I have no animosity whatsoever. I just think you needed to hear the truth. Thank you.
All right, and I do believe that concludes public comment.
I believe so. Thank you.
So I would like to first thank Dr. Kimberly and her team. For those who have been following the work of Dr. Kimberly and her team at the University of South Florida over the years, attendant to this site, I think what we've heard here today is that she and her team worked very thoroughly, very diligently, and very comprehensively to attempt to identify anything that we all as a state or we all as stakeholders needed to know that could be found, anything remaining that could be found out at the site. I'd also like to recognize and thank Governor Ron DeSantis for his commitment to renewed focus and energy and resources devoted to ensuring that we had taken all possible steps to both investigate, review, and research the site that exists. That commitment is evidenced by the groups who are represented here today. We have DEO, DMS, DEP, FDLE, the governor's office, and of course my own, who have all worked collaboratively and diligently to discover, review, analyze, and share with the public any information that we could develop and that we have exhausted to the satisfaction of Dr. Kimberly, our team of archaeologists and the experts who study these types of grounds and these types of lands, all methods that they felt were possible at this time for us to identify any additional information. We've also, of course, involved for many years the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, who've reviewed very thoroughly the allegations that are related to any sort of criminal behavior. As I mentioned earlier, we will maintain an open public comment line for emails. If anyone who is present today has additional thoughts, ideas, or suggestions, or other actions that they think are warranted or appropriate, you, of course, are welcome to submit those to us. And if there was anyone who wasn't able to join us today, either in person or by telephone, they too will be welcome to submit any additional comments, suggestions, or ideas that they may have. We have also provided copies of Dr. Kimberly's very thorough report. If anyone requires a copy of the report and doesn't have it, please let us know. We've heard comments from the public. Are there any members of the task force who are here with us today that wish to share before we close? All right, seeing none, I thank you all very much for being here, for your perspective, for your input, and your assistance in this project. And with that, we are adjourned.
I'd like to apologize for the statements that Jerry Rice made on behalf of the official White House boys. Sometimes people, he is from the institution in Okeechobee, and sometimes we get carried away with what we say and do. So please accept my apology on behalf of the boys from Marietta. And I'd like to thank everybody that welcomed us here. You have all been very polite and informant to a lot of things. And if I should die or something, make sure you follow her to the woods.
Thank you, Mr. Podge.